guys, welcome back. I know it's been a little while since our last reading. I've been kind of doing my own reading as I go and maybe posting some shorts and some small things like that. But today we are back with our book. For those who are new, this book is called The People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. It's really definitely worth reading and checking out. Fantastic author and someone who is um, repeatedly cited by the historical community today and political science community and all of them. They really do cite his novelizations and quotes he's made in the past. So he's definitely someone of credibility and of high esteem to look up to. So without further ado, let's check out chapter 17. Or does it explode? The Black Revolt of the 1950s and 60s, North and South, came as a surprise, but perhaps it should not have. The memory of oppressed people is one thing that cannot be taken away. And for such people with such memories, revolt is always an inch below the surface. So what he means by that, when he says that a revolt is just an inch beneath below the surface, it means that it's a ticking time bomb. There's only so much time before people will revolt and say, "We're tired of incremental change. We are tired of protesting. We're gonna have to take up arms to get what we want," and that's what he's referencing here. For blacks in the United States, there was the memory of slavery, and after that, of segregation, lynching, humiliation. And it was not just a memory, but a living presence, part of the daily lives of blacks in generations after generations. In the 1930s, Langston Hughes wrote a poem, quote, Lenox Avenue Mural. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over, like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it's just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? In a society of complex controls, both crude and refined, secret thoughts can ought to be found in the arts. And so it was in black society, perhaps the blues, however pathetic, concealed anger in the jazz. However joyful, portended rebellion. And then the poetry, the thoughts no longer so secret. In the 1920s, Claude McKay, one of the figures of what came to be called the quote, Harlem Renaissance, wrote a poem that Henry Cabot Lodge put in the Congressional Record as an example of dangerous currents among young blacks. This is the definition of systemic racism. If we must die, let it not be like hogs, haunted and penned in an inglorious spot. Like men, we'll face the murderous cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying but fighting back. County Cullen's poem, called Incident, evoked memories, all different, all the same, out of every black American's childhood. Once riding in old Baltimore, heart filled, head filled with glee, I saw a Baltimorean keep looking straight at me. Now I was 8 and very small, and he was no whit bigger. And so I smiled, but he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore, from May until December. Of all the things that happened there, that's all I remember. At the time of the Scottsboro Boys incident, Colin wrote a bitter poem, noting that white poets had used their pens to protest in other cases of injustice. But now that blacks were involved, most were silent. His last stanza was, Surely I said, now will the poem sing, but they have raised no cry. I wonder why. Think about it. Even outward subservience, Uncle Tom behavior, in real situations, the cum or fawning Negro on the stage, the self ridicule, the caution, concealed resentment, anger, energy, the black poet Paul Laurence Dunbar, And the area of the black minstrel around the turn of the century wrote, quote, "We wear the mask. We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. We sing, but oh, the clay is rile beneath our feet in the long mile. But let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask." Two black performers at that time played the minstrel and satirized it at that time. When Bert Williams and George Walker billed themselves as, quote, two real coons, they were, Nathan Huggins says, quote, intending to give style and comic dignity to a fiction that white men had created. By the 1930s, the mask was off for many black poets. Langston Hughes wrote, quote, I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Gwendolyn Bennett wrote, I went to see little Negro girls etched dark against the sky while sunset lingers. I want to hear the chanting around a heathen fire of a strange black race. I want to feel the surging of my sad people's soul hidden by a sinister smile. There was Margaret Walker's prose poem, quote, For my people. Let a new earth rise. Let another world be born. Let a bloody peace be written in the sky. Let a second generation full of courage issue forth. Let a people loving freedom come to growth. Let a beauty full of healing and strength, a final clenching be the pulsing in our spines, and our spirits and our blood. Let the martial songs be written. Let the dirges disappear. Let a race of men now rise and take control. By the 1940s, there was Richard Wright, a gifted novelist, a black man. His autobiography in 1937, Black Boy, gave endless insights. For instance, how blacks were set against one another. When he told how he was prodded to fight another black boy for the amusement of white men, Black Boy expressed unashamedly, even humiliation. And then the white South said it, quote, knew niggers. And it was what the white South called a nigger. Well, the white South had never known me, never knows what I thought, what I felt. The white South said that I had a, quote, place in life. Well, I never felt my, quote, place, to which the white South had assigned me. It had never occurred to me that I was in a way, well, anyway, an inferior being, and no word that I'd ever heard fall from the lips of Southern white men had ever made me really doubt the worth of my own humanity. It was all there in the poetry, the prose, the music, sometimes masked, sometimes unmistakably clear. The signs of a people unbeaten, waiting, hot and cold. In Black Boy, Wright told about the training of black children in America to keep them silent, but also how do Negroes feel about the way they have to live? How do they discuss it one alone among themselves? I think this question can be answered in a single sentence. A friend of mine who ran an elevator once told me, quote, Lord man, if it wasn't for them polices and them a lynch mobs, there wouldn't be nothing but uproar down here. Richard Wright, for a time, joined the Communist Party that tells of this period of his life and his disillusionment with the party and the God that failed. The Communist Party was known to pay special attention to the problem of racial equality. When the Scottsboro case unfolded in the 1930s in Alabama, it was the Communist Party that had become associated with the defense of these young black men imprisoned in the early years of the Depression by Southern injustice. Now, to give some historical context, the reason why this happened was because, back in this time period, the Republicans were the party of freed on the party of racial equality in the early 1900s. But once they started to falter and say, we're just going to be racist, we're not really going to do much to help those of, people of color and disenfranchised communities, the Democrats didn't do much better. They were the very racist party back then. So, of course, they had to look to a different organization. And who was that? The Communist Party. You had the Socialist Party, the NAACP. They all came in to rescue because the two-party system failed to help these people. The party was accused by liberals and in the NAACP, the National American Association for Colored People, of exploiting the issue for its own purposes. And there was a half-truth in it. But black people were realistic about the difficulty of having white allies who were pure in motive. The other half of the truth was that black communists in the South had earned the admiration of blacks by their organizing work against enormous obstacles. There was Hosea Hudson, the black organizer of the unemployed in Birmingham, for instance, and in Georgia in 1932, a 19-year-old black youth named Angelo Herndon, whose father died of miner's pneumonia, who had worked in the mines as a boy in Kentucky, joined an unemployment council in Birmingham organized by the Communist Party, and then joined the party. He wrote later, all my life, I had been sweated and stepped on and Jim Crowed. I lay on my belly in the mines for a few dollars a week, and I saw my pay stolen and slashed, and my body's killed. I lived in the worst section of town and rode behind the colored signs on streetcars, as though there was something disgusting about me. I heard myself called nigger and called darky, and I had to say yes sir in every white man, whether he had my respect or not. I'd always detested it, but I'd never known that anything could be done about it. And here, all of a sudden, I'd found organizing in which Negroes and whites sat together and worked together and knew no difference of race or color. Herndon became a Communist Party organizer in Atlanta. He and his fellow communists organized block committees of unemployment councils in 1932, which got rent relief for needy people. They organized a demonstration to which 1,000 people came. 600 of them were white. And the next day, the city voted $6,000 in relief to the jobless. But soon after that, Herndon was arrested, held incommunicado, and charged with violating a Georgia statute against insurrection. He recalled his trial. The state of Georgia displayed the literature that had been taken from my room and read passages of it to the jury. They questioned me in great detail. Did I believe that the bosses in the government ought to pay insurance to unemployed workers? That the Negroes should have complete equality with white people? Did I believe in the demand for the self-determination of the Black Belt, that the Negro people should be allowed to rule the Black Belt territory, kicking out the white landlords and government officials? Did I feel that the working class men could run the mills and mines and government, that it was necessary to have bosses at all? I told them I believed all of that, and more. This is really the time in history when the African American community is realizing we have to do something. And now, when the white and black joins forces, that's when the government gets scared that, hey, if they unite, we're not going to have the ability to oppress them, to segregate them, and to exploit them any more than they have. I love water. Don't drink enough of it. So Aquafina water gets a bad rap. Not sponsored, but I like water. Makes you thirsty reading so much. Herndon was convicted and spent 5 years in prison until 1937. The Supreme Court ruled unconstitutional the Georgia statute under which he was found guilty. It was men like him who represented to the establishment a dangerous militancy among blacks, made more dangerous when linked with the Communist Party. The communists were always seen as a threat because you look at the Soviet Union, which was technically state-owned capitalism, but they had the Communist Manifesto, Marxist Leninism, whatever. America saw that as a threat to democracy. Well, in this case, it doesn't seem like it because the Communist Party is helping people pursue their interests. There were others who made that same connection, magnifying the danger. Benjamin Davis, the black lawyer who defended Herndon at his trial, nationally renowned man like singer and actor Paul Robeson, and writer and scholar W.E.B. Du Bois, who was cited a lot in the historian community, who did not hide their support and sympathy for the Communist Party. The Negro was not as anti-communist as the white population. He could not afford to be. His friends were so few. So that Herndon, Davis, Robeson, Du Bois, however their political views might be maligned by the country as a whole, found admiration for their fighting spirit in the black community. The black militant school, flashing here and there in the 30s, was reduced to a subsurface, simmering during World War II, when the nation on the one hand denounced racism, on the other hand maintained segregation in the armed forces and kept blacks in low-paying jobs. When the war ended, a new element entered the racial balance to the United States, the enormous, unprecedented upsurge of blacks and yellow people in Africa and Asia, as in Asians. President Harry Truman had to reckon with this, especially as the Cold War rivalry with the Soviet Union began, and the dark-skinned revolt of former colonies, although the world threatened to take Marxist form. Now, what does that mean? When they say dark-skinned revolt, they're talking about Haiti or countries in Africa that were under the imperialist regimes of America, Britain, Germany, countries like them. So they're saying, look, we're going to take on the ideology of Marxism, Leninism, you know, other forms of socialism because the systems they were under, brutally under, were not working. Action on the race question was needed, not just to calm a black population at home, emboldened by war promises, frustrated by the basic sameness of their condition. It was needed to present to the world a United States that could counter the continuous communist threat and the most flagrant failure of American society. The race question. What Du Bois had said long ago, unnoticed and now loomed large, in 1945, quote, the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the colored line. President Harry Truman in late 1946 appointed the Committee on Civil Rights, which recommended that the Civil Rights section of the Department of Justice be expanded, that there be a permanent commission on civil rights, that Congress passes laws against lynching and to stop voting discrimination, Jim Crow, and to adjust new laws to end racial discrimination in jobs, which still happens a lot to this day. Truman's committee was blunt about its motivation in making these recommendations. Yes, it said there was, quote, moral reason, a matter of conscience, but there was also an, quote, economic reason. Discrimination was costly to the country, wasteful its talent, and perhaps most important, there was an international reason. Our position in the post-war world is so vital in the future that our smallest actions have far-reaching effects. Basically, a way of saying what I like to quote as the domino effect. When one country does one thing and tackles this issue in a certain way, other nations, those world leaders, those organizations, those charities, they will all act the same way. It's kind of like, the game of the follow the leader, where one person does one thing, everybody else follows. We cannot escape the fact that our civil rights record has been an issue in world politics. The world's press and radio are full of it. Those with competing philosophies have stressed and are shamelessly distorting our shortcomings. Not true. They have tried to prove our democracy an empty fraud, which it is, and our nation is a constant oppressor of underprivileged people. Also true. This may seem ludicrous to Americans, but it is strong. The final triumph of the democratic ideal is not so inevitable that we can ignore what the world thinks of us and our record. That is a very powerful quote because there is something called a self image. We perceive ourselves in one way. You know, let's take Follyland. Let's say this is a country called Follyland, and let's say they perceive themselves as this weak, you know, not influential country. We just don't feel we're recognized in the national community. We feel like we're doing our best, but we don't see ourselves as that great. But then the other international communities, they can look and say, no, you guys are actually doing really good for where you came from. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. Is that America, the best analogy is the Avengers meme. I'm sure you guys seen that Avengers meme, right? Where it's Avengers Star Wars meme, where America, we see ourselves as the Avengers, the beacon of hope, the Liberation Army. We are here for world peace. That's the Statue of Liberty. It means we welcome all people. We perceive ourselves that way with very little problems. But on the outside of the world, they see us as the Galactic Empire. That's kind of what he's also talking about here. The United States was out in the world, down in the way. They had never been. The stakes were large, world supremacy, and as Truman's committee said, quote, our smallest actions have far-reaching effects. We'll quote that again. And so the United States went ahead to take small actions, hoping they would have large effects. Congress did more to enact the legislation asked for by the Congress Committee on Civil Rights, but Truman, 4 months before the presidential election of 1948, and challenged from the left in that election by Progressive Party candidate Henry Wallace, which, fun fact about that in a minute, issued an executive order asking that the armed forces segregated in World War II institute policies of racial equality, quote, as rapidly as possible. The order may have been prompted not only by the election, but by the need to maintain black morale in the armed forces. As the possibility of war grew, it took over a decade to complete the desegregation in the military. I'm going to pause there for today, but a couple fun facts. You know, yes, the United States military has 1,000 different problems, of course, with discrimination against women. We're finally letting them become Rangers and SEALs, and also racial issues and the gay issue, whatever, and also very bad crimes overseas. But as a whole, the military's actually been one step ahead in the game. You know, the military was desegregated before schools were. Think about that. We desegregated the military before we did schools. The military's been always pro on this social issue, and now we're stepping back from diesel gas and now having electric vehicles, especially now with FEMA helping clean up after Hurricane Ian this past month. But also, back to Henry Wallace. Henry Wallace was supposed to be FDR's vice president pick, but he stepped out of that position, and Truman was selected as vice president. Now, Henry Wallace was effectively a socialist, and it's always debated on what would the world be like if Henry Wallace was president after FDR and not Truman. I think we'd be looking to a different country right now because of that. So just a fun fact for people who don't know that either. It's really the choices you make will have long-lasting effects, not just 5, 10 years down the road, but when we're talking 20, 40, 60 years later. And we're still seeing the ramifications of those decisions to this day by the Truman administration, the Truman Doctrine. And that's very important. So again, I highly recommend you guys really check out this book and some of the other novelizations I've read on this channel. Even those who may not be very interested in politics or economics, it's always worth getting another perspective besides what you learn in school, or what you see online or on YouTube, etc. Um, if you want to go back and look later, I have read a book on uh, What is Marxism by Richard Wolff. I have that on the channel. Another book I have on the channel is, what's it called? fucking up. I have another good book I read on the channel. The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton. Definitely take a look at that. People have a misunderstanding of how the United States government works when it comes to finances. It's really interesting. It's very fascinating. I learned a lot from that book. And I read another book called "The Sickness is the System: When Capitalism Fails to Protect Us from Pandemics or Itself." So it's really just another book to look at. But again, no, I really do enjoy reading historical context because it gives you so much more insight than maybe what you knew. And of course, it's really hard to cover a lot of this, and it's going to take a while to finish this book. But also, besides this, there are a couple books coming. There's one book I'm going to get here later, and another one that comes out probably next year. But I definitely am open to suggestions if you guys have a favorite sci-fi book or fantasy book or even a fiction, nonfiction novel you'd like me to read. I'm 100% open to suggestions, and wanting to kind of expand on different novels in the channel. If you guys like to see me do other things besides reading in shorts, let me know. I'm open to kind of really anything at all. So, besides that, thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate the support and the new subscribers as well. Feel free to pass along. This is a great opportunity for people to feel relaxed and learn, all in one. You don't get that in school, do you? We're in college, for example. So, other than that, thank you guys again and have a wonderful day. Stay warm with all the cold weather.